This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
Good morning. I'm not Eric Joyce MP. I'm Alex Terry, the coordinator of the Delivery Information Forum. Eric Joyce appears to be late, so I'm going to chair this session in his place. The first session today is titled Maximising the Spread Effects of Mining. We have two distinguished speakers from Peru and Bolivia here, Carlos Monge and Jose Pimentel. I'll introduce them each, give you a brief background of each one before they speak. Carlos Monge is going to start talking about mining revenues and their management. Carlos Monge is the Latin America Regional Coordinator of Revenue Watch Institute. That's a non-profit policy institute and grant-making organisation that promotes effective and accountable management of extractive resources for the public good. He's also a senior researcher for the Peruvian Centre for the Study and Promotion of Development, DESCO. He works on extractive sector transparency issues with numerous civil society organisations and has been a member of the International Board of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. From 2002 to 2005, Carlos was head of citizen monitoring and promotion of participation, and then head of the communications for Grupo Propuesta Ciudadana, an institution dedicated to promoting decentralization as a participative process. He's the author of several publications on issues related to rural development, social movements, decentralization, citizen participation, and conflicts generated by extractive industries. Carlos holds a degree in anthropology from the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru and a PhD in history from the University of Miami. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Carlos. Each talk will be 15 minutes. I'll give you a morning.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. The question of rent management. There are diverse mechanisms for rent management. There are funds, there are distribution mechanisms, there are the national oil companies, we have direct transfers to citizens, and we have subsidies for consumers. And talking about more specifically about the rent distribution mechanisms within the national state, in Latin America there is a very heterogeneous situation. We have some cases like in Mexico, and I would say now in Ecuador, where there is no real rent distribution and all of the extractive rent goes into the national budget and is handled directly by the Congress and the executive. We have a trend in some other countries, like in Peru and Colombia, to compensate producing regions. And we have now the Bolivia experience that is aiming to compensate directly with cash transfers, the so-called bonos, the vulnerable sectors in the country, the old families with children in school age, and women who are pregnant or have children up to 2 years of age. So there are different trends regarding rent distribution in Latin America. There's no uniform pattern, and they respond to specific historical and experiences and political circumstances. In the case of Peru, as I was saying, the major feature is to give back to the producing regions part of what has been taken out from them. So that's what we call the canon mechanism. It's a mechanism that allocates the royalties and 50% of the income tax paid by the companies back to the producing regions. The concept is that you want to give back to a producing region in the way of fiscal capital what has been extracted in the way of natural capital. That's an abstract definition. A more concrete one is that what you return to a producing region in the form of fiscal capital should generate the same public rent that is now generated by the extracted natural capital. that assumes that rent is going to be invested, that investments are going to sustain increased economic activities, and that these economic activities are going to generate a public rent that is equivalent to what was being generated by the extractive activity per se. The method used in Peru is a 50% split of the income tax paid by the companies. There's no science to this. That was just an arbitrary political decision. Well, 50-50 sounds like pretty fair, and that's it. But there's no real substance to that decision. And basically, what I have to say regarding this concept is that no real research has been done so far to measure if indeed canon is meeting its fundamental goal. So we really don't know what is the long-term impact of the resources being given to the regions, and if the use of that resources is actually meeting the established goal of dynamizing economic activities in a way that in the long run they will generate the public rents that are now being generated by the extractive sector. So I think we still have a challenge there in terms of generating information and knowledge and doing research and see what's happening regarding this critical concept. No? Now, in Peru, there's a history, of course. Canon legislation started in the 70s with oil in the Amazon basin. It was expanded to oil in the coast in the 80s, to mining in the mining sector in the 90s, but not actually really implemented until 2001, in which we have a law in the context when we were starting the whole process of decentralization, and then several changes, and then the royalty laws in 2004. So what we have now is the canon laws and the royalty laws, and they both combined explain how huge amounts of money are sort of being given back to the producing regions, to the regional and local governments. This is the distribution scheme. Sorry, I couldn't translate that into English. The basic point here is that the producing district gets a lot of money because it gets 10%, then it participates in the 25% that is obtained by the producing province, and then it also participates again in the 40% that is allocated to all the provinces. So it's actually receiving money 3 times, no? And of course, sometimes the regional government also invests in that producing district. So there's like a 4th source of revenues there. So there's an extreme concentration of canon resources at the municipal level, and within them, an extreme concentration in the producing districts as such. And this is the scheme for the royalties. As you can see, all goes to the producing region, but most of it goes to the municipalities, a little bit to the regional government, and some money goes to the regional universities. Now, as this government started, it produced a negotiation with the companies, with the mining sector, to generate an additional income for the government, an additional contribution. And the negotiation was based on 3 ideas: modifications in the royalty rates for all companies, the creation of a new tax for those companies that were not protected by stability contracts, and voluntary additional payments for those companies that were protected by stability contracts and therefore could not be subject to additional taxes. Altogether, this generated 2 debates. First, how much money? It was said 3,000 millones de soles, 3,000 million soles. I don't know how to say that properly in English. I always 3 billion soles. But in the end, it's less than half. Why? Because all these new payments are now discounted from the income tax payments. They are considered as a cost. So once you add and subtract, it's less than half of what was announced. But most importantly, all this money goes to the central government and not to the regions. So in fact, this process of negotiation of an additional contribution is less than what it was announced, and it's part of a trend to re-centralize the monies in the hands of the central government. Now, one of the consequences of of canon and the way it's established is that you have a high level of concentration, as I was saying, on some districts and on some regions at the expense of the others. And the point is that this allocation of money to the producing region has nothing to do with poverty compensation or with per capita fairness. So we have two small regions like Moquegua and Tacna, which are very rich in copper, that have two previous features. They rank very high in the Human Development Index, so they are doing pretty well for Peruvian standards, and they have very small population. Nevertheless, they get a lot of money, so they have a huge per capita allocation of public resources that has nothing to do with the population and with the needs of that population. And on the other hand, you have heavily populated, very poor areas that have no mining activity, so they don't receive those amounts of money. So what was initially thought of as a fair mechanism to compensate a producing region has now ended up being a factor that allocates monies in ways that have nothing to do with any concept of per capita fairness or with any concept of needs arising out of situations of poverty or lack of development or lack of infrastructure or whatever measure you have to use. So, I mean, everybody is crying out loud for reforming the canon laws to allow for more fairness and for allocations that really respond to the developmental, sorry Tony, that's a forbidden word, no? The D word, for well-being purposes, no? So that's a debate that is not going on in Peru, how to reform these canon laws, no? Also some data regarding the heavy concentration on the subnational governments at the municipal level. No? You have 6 municipalities have almost 15% of all mining canon resources, and you have close to 18,000 other municipalities, 1,800 other municipalities receiving almost 80% of the canon resources. So 6 again against 1,800 is a quite an unfair distribution. Some additional data. No? I will, because I am going to run short of time, I want to go to some data that allows for some qualitative discussions. First is the question of the capacity of subnational governments. It has been said a lot in Peru by the central government that subnational authorities are not capable of spending such amounts of money, and that's an argument for the current process for re-centralizing the monies in the hands of the national government. Nevertheless, what we have found is that starting from almost nothing, subnational governments have increased their capacities to spend these monies in an amazing way. So while the central government has sort of the same spending capacity that it has had in the last 2 decades, the subnational governments starting from scratch with no capacities have really learned how to spend the money. Second, that in the last 2 or 3 years, actually, subnational governments have had a higher capacity than the central government to spend the money they are receiving out of the extractive sector. And this is very interesting because the central government has not shown the capacity to react to increased amounts of resources as the subnational governments have demonstrated. There's a discussion about investment priorities, but I wanted to go into an issue of impact. So what's happening with all this money? What's the impact it's having so far? So as it is usually my role, I'm going to highlight some critical aspects and not say, okay, we have a lot of money, that's good. First, Peru as a country is undergoing a very clear case of Dutch disease. But this is data for all of Latin America produced by ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, that is now officially saying we are also experiencing in different levels of death a problem of Dutch disease. And this is very critical because, you know, the value of the sol goes up, the value of the dollar goes down, so other export-oriented activities lose competitivity, but internally also it makes no sense to produce because now you can import what you eventually would produce in Peru. So productive sectors that are aimed both at the export markets and for internal consumption are suffering from this situation. Second, we have come up with something that we have called, Tony has heard about this before, we have called the Cholo disease, for the use of a better word, no? Which is, I guess, a way of the Dutch disease at the local level, so we have two things happening at the same time. On one hand, there is limited local content in the extractive activities. You know, the technical definition for local content is the amounts of goods and services that are provided by the local economies to the actual productive process, the mine or the oil project. Because they hire little unskilled local labor, because they acquire small amounts of local goods and services. I mean, a peasant in a producing region has little chances of selling his foodstuff to the mining company. The mining company cannot go around on a household by household basis buying some cheese and ham and potatoes. No? It needs a permanent stock of produce, and it tends to hire an international logistics provider and solve its problem. But that peasant that cannot get a job in the mining company because he's not qualified, and cannot sell his food to the mining company because he can't, at the same time facing an inflationary process of the urban services that he has to acquire on a daily basis. No? So if you go to the city, you cannot find a cheap hotel anymore, you cannot find cheap food, all the visual, every paperwork, everything that you have to do has become more expensive. No? So large extractive investments can coexist with rural poverty and eventually might worsen it. On the other hand, there is all this money going into the hands of the mayors, and they are forced to spend. Otherwise, they have the threat of recentralization, of being accused of being useless and being taken the money away. So the rent is invested by law in physical infrastructure, but now, because now they have the possibility of using part of that money, a significant part of that money, for maintenance purposes. Meaning you can hire a lot of people to basically do nothing in the name of maintenance. And they pay more because they need to spend the money, and also because they want to be re-elected. So the fact is that there is in producing regions now a massive distortion of the labor market, a massive distortion of the labor market, with mayors paying 3, 4, 5 times more wages than an average agricultural producer can. So they are like killing the possibility of agriculture going on. No? We have some extreme examples in Cusco, in the Convención Valley, where we have this very extended coffee, cacao, and tea sector for export. The local leaders of the cooperatives, which were the result of the peasant mobilizations in the agrarian reform of the 60s and 70s, have approached the mayors to tell them you're killing us. So some mayors have stopped public works during the harvest season to force the labor force to go back to the agricultural harvest season. Others that probably have not been educated in the modern principles of gender have prohibited the hire of women in the public works. So the female labor force goes back to the agricultural activities while the male labor force stays there. In one other extreme case, in Ite, in Tacna, the mayor has hired all the adult population is working for the mayor. So rural producers go and register themselves in the mayor's office, and the mayor sends around workers for free. So it's some kind of fantastic labor socialism built in a small district out of a pauper rent here, no? Of course, everything is unsustainable. That cannot happen. And the question is, what's going to happen with agriculture in the meantime? What's going to happen in the long terms, in economic terms, in social terms? And Dr. Thorpe was asking about the cultural impact of this. If you have 2 generations of people not working the land altogether, the transfer of knowledge, the learning process, the youngsters, what kind of relation with the land of agriculture they're going to build? And my feeling is that none. So there might be a long-term harm to other more sustainable and socially inclusive activities, no? In the name of long-term benefits from mining. No? And finally, and this is a very critical thing, I think we need to open up a discussion, a serious discussion now in Peru regarding the relations between mining and well-being of the population. I'm sorry for the lack of clarity. I just picked up this from this is a table that I made for a newspaper, and I have never found the original. So I have to copy it from a small column in the newspaper. But it basically says that there is no positive statistical relation between, one, lots of mining investment, second, lots of mining generated rent available for the subnational governments, and two sets of indicators, economic dynamism and improvements in poverty. There is no positive relation. So you cannot find a statistical basis to say that mining is creating poverty or mining is eliminating poverty. You do not have the basis to make a solid statement. Now, this is all built on very unreliable official data on the economic performance of the regions and local governments in Peru. So my point here is that we, after 30 years of mining in the way we do it, and after over a decade now of this boom in prices and production and investment, with a lot of available data on poverty and not so good data on economic performance at the subnational level, we need to do a lot more of research to actually see what are the more general impacts of mining on the well-being of the people. But what cannot be sustained by the data is the fact that mining is bringing development, however we understand it, and that mining is actually operating to alleviate poverty. That's an ideological statement that is not supported by the available data and the concrete case-by-case experience that we see. Thank you very much.